Hello. Good morning. Hello, Nadav, and thank you for agreeing to join us today. Nadav and we served together. I was the head of the Intel Directorate at that time, and he was the head of the Shabak. It was an interesting experience to have this interview, so we'll keep it fast-paced and brief. Before we delve into what I think a lot of people are interested in, which is Intel and warning of why it happened, what's going on, and why this happened to us, I'd like you to take us back for a moment to what was described as the axis of evil, or what was described as or normalization that we were supposed to operate against it, Iran and the developments in the past decade. From your perspective, as somebody who was very involved in the past decade in all of your roles and in the intel and security establishments, give us a broad view here. How did we get to that situation that we ended up in the 7th of October? Okay, good morning, everybody. And the snapshot here is, the current snapshot is, and this is the result of 12, 13 years in my view, and I'll go into the details afterwards, but it's important for you to have that snapshot. And that picture is that Iran is in a threshold nuclear state. We are surrounded by Iran's proxies on all sides, by a circle of fire with Hezbollah on the north, militias in Iraq and Syria, Houthis in Yemen, Hamas and Islamic Jihad in Gaza, and Judea and Samaria. That's the situation. And that is the result of a lack of strategy and policy in the state of Israel. Two, it's also the product of strategies that integrate of the state of Israel versus the Palestinian Authority, and the worldview of the PA. Hamas had two strategies. First of all, it was about fortifying the Gaza Strip in order to take over the Palestinian Authority on the day after Abu Mazen. The state of Israel had a strategy of weakening the Palestinian Authority, and for that, it would strengthen Hamas in the Gaza Strip, and in general through Qatari money. This ended up in a disaster we'll talk about. And then we end up with those integrating strategies. On the one hand, how Hamas gets stronger through with the Temple Mount and terror attacks in Judea and Samaria and within the state of Israel. On the other hand, it fortifies its strength and its status so that it will have that ability to fight the state of Israel and to take over the Palestinian Authority when the time comes. We were both part of the system, and I imagine that both I and you feel the weight of that responsibility, even though many years have gone by since we were there. We were surprised on the 7th of October on that morning, but you mentioned, among other things, the suitcases of money and the arrangement with Hamas. And there are those who claim that it didn't begin on the 7th of October. The 7th of October was just the accident, but the acceleration towards the accident occurred before that. So if with a bit of soul searching, looking at what happened during our time and what's going on right now, how do you see it? Is it right to look at the things that occurred before? How did we get there? First of all, we must look at what occurred in the past, because it's not that we woke up in the morning one day and we ended up with the 7th of October. There are factors that led to that. The first thing is the conception that we, or the state of Israel, decided that it's going to buy quiet at a very high price, very high price for the future. And Israel chose quiet. It got addicted to that quiet. So the Qatari money served that purpose. Why did the state of Israel get addicted to that quiet? That's a very looming question. They said that that would give us the advantage so that we could deal with the Iranian nuclear project. Some will say that. Others will say that it's a lack of strategy and that the state of Israel deals with the problem when it comes across the problem. I think that the problem begins with the misunderstanding of what Hamas is as a terror organization, what its motivations are, what are its abilities. It's a very serious organization with very serious people with quality, good abilities, whose objective, since it was conceived, was to take over the Palestinian Authority, and of course, ultimately, to defeat the state of Israel. Ultimately. And by the way, I understood this at very early stages. At 2003, for those of you who remember, that operation where we tried to to assassinate the Hamas leadership in the Gaza Strip. The bomb that we dropped was too small because we were under the effect of Salah Shadeh, for those of you who remember, in 2002. When you don't understand what the implication is of hitting the leadership of an organization, if we were to strike at the leadership of that organization throughout all of those years, from 2003 until today, we would have been able to change the reality. And when a state sets a strategy and says, this organization, in this organization, we need to strike at it at such an intensity that it can never take over a nation or take over a territory or militarily threaten Israel, something needs to be done. One, we didn't do this, even though we could have done that. We could have harmed or struck Hamas's leadership more than once, and we could have changed reality at a much lower price than what we're paying today, with a much higher degree of success. I'm not sure that this is how we would basically finish off Hamas. Hamas is a very large and complex organization. The second problem is the State of Israel addressed Hamas and Gaza and as states and not as Hezbollah and Hamas as state, as not as states. In other words, they didn't go to war to degrade military buildup, but the State of Israel ultimately, there's an terror organization that took over people in the Gaza Strip, that took over a territory. In Lebanon, a terror organization is there that has taken over the country. It's taken over territory too. In both places, we saw and we knew that there was military buildup. In both places, we were under the conception that we don't go to war against military buildup. Now, I agree that you don't go to war if you have a choice, but I feel that striking Hamas at much earlier stages, and the same for Hezbollah, striking them much earlier, is in a war that you have no choice because the situation is intolerable today, and it will cost us dearly, much more. It wouldn't have cost us so much if we would have struck them earlier. Why? I know that in certain cases you had a hawkish approach towards the Hamas leadership, including Sinwar, which we're seeing today. Why is he still alive? Yes, Sinwar, unfortunately, is living because the State of Israel decided that it doesn't want to go on an adventure in the Gaza Strip. I don't know what the Prime Minister's considerations were. I raised this issue not just once. Yoram Cohen, who was the head of the Shabak, raised this point before I did. Ronen continued doing so after me, and ultimately the State of Israel chose to get addicted to quiet. I could think that the State of Israel or the Prime Minister doesn't want to be drawn into a war. He has a problem with legitimacy domestically and internationally. Ultimately, the Prime Minister needs to lead the state, and he has to have a strategy. I think that the strategy that the State of Israel chose in the past decade, at least, is a strategy that came across a brick wall. And then you understand that there's a problem, and only then do you look for the solution. Instead of leading, therefore, we were dragged on, and when you're dragged on, you have no ability to provide a good solution. I can tell you that if we were to start with a surprise attack against Hamas and the Gaza Strip, and we could have done so, then our reality would be totally different. We both began as people in operations, and we ended up as intel guys. And I'm sure you're asking yourself this question all the time. How did this happen to us? How did this happen to the intel people? With the glorious systems that we all know, how could such a horrible intel failure have happened? First of all, that's a good question that people are going to have to investigate through the inquiries. The second thing is that what we call the conception had taken over our minds. This is something that I feel that brain scientists need to study, because look, anybody who thinks that Hamas is deterred sees a picture and analyzes it in a certain way. And unfortunately, there were people like that in the system who thought that Hamas is deterred. I don't think Hamas was ever deterred, just like Hezbollah was never deterred. And I knew that Hamas wasn't deter, and I could prove that through the intel that I saw. because a deterred organization doesn't continue to do terror attacks in Judea and Samaria or from the Gaza Strip in order to undermine the stability between Israel and the PA. Therefore, it was clear that Hamas is not deterred, in my view. But when I analyze these things from my perspective, when I think that Hamas is not deterred, this is different from the the picture of the situation that people feel when they think that Hamas is deterred, and all that they're interested in it is for life to be good in Gaza, to bring Gazan workers to Israel, and to use Qatari money for the well-being of the residents of the Strip. Sinwar has no interest in the residents of the Gaza Strip and in the infrastructure of the Gaza Strip. For him, they are tools in the game in order to harm and to try to defeat, to bring the state of Israel to its knees. The second point is, and it's a very important point in my view, since we are familiar with the intel failures, and because we know what we know, and we only know what we know, our operational worldview should have been, and it must be, under the assumption that we will always be surprised. In other words, we know how to do our intel assessments. We hope that we have sufficient intel, but we need to assume that we will always be surprised. And you can use that to view all of the strategic surprises from that we've ever had. And this is what we should have done operationally, and where the conception failed and where the fence had failed. And ultimately, the fence is not a fighting force. It's a factor that delays and nothing more than that. We should have had forces that would allow us to stop this type of a takeover from the Gaza area. Our time is running out. People talked a lot here about the PA. I want to present a different view. Some people feel that the return of the PA to Gaza and the rehabilitation of Gaza with Gulf money is the same conception that collapsed. What's the difference? You're bringing in Palestinians, so you're calling them the PA. You're bringing money from the Gulf. This time it's not from Qatar, it's from Saudi Arabia. You're building that force for them. You think that they're going to deal with the problem for you, and then we'll wake up to a new 7th of October. Okay, you could say anything you want, but that ultimately isn't logical. Hamas is a terror organization, and the PA is the legitimate representative of the Palestinian people. They're the ones who are here. We're going to have to do business with them and deals with them, peace deals with them. Therefore, there's a very big difference between them. Number two, the PA is not an entity that encourages terror. In my view, it isn't a terror or at all. Hamas encourages terror. It's a terror organization. Its main goal is to destroy the state of Israel. The Palestinian Authority sees itself living alongside it. It has problems with governance. It has lots of problems. It has the level of governance that it has. It has a problem with security forces, but ultimately they are the legitimate representative of the Palestinian people, which we'll have to learn to live with. They are the ones that we will have to do everything to make sure that ultimately they are the ones to take power and to hold the leash in the Gaza Strip instead of Hamas. One short question, because we're out of time. The head of the Shabak decided to start the investigations, and that's what they said in the media. And it's not talking about bad blood and a lot of noise that will prevent the Shabak or support the fighting the way that it's supposed to be. What do you think about that decision, and what would you do? First of all, I think that the head of the Shabak has to do investigations. He can't wait. We've been fighting for 5 months. You need to understand what happened here, what the reasons were for it, where the problems were, to make those immediate corrections so that ultimately we could continue to manage this war-fighting situation in Gaza. You need to reach lessons learned. I feel this is basic. The reality forces us to do so, and it's good that he did so. Thank you very much. Wait a second. You've always got something to add. There's one very significant issue, and I have to end with it. Look, after all of this horrible evil that befell us, I'm still optimistic. I'm optimistic because, first of all, we have no other choice. Because I think that the Israeli people deserve to be somewhere else. But for that to happen, We need, first and foremost, to replace this disastrous government. We have no other choice. We must replace this disastrous government, because otherwise my optimism can't happen. They are the main failure, and this is what's preventing us now from creating a different future in the Gaza Strip. It is what is preventing us from creating a coalition led by the Americans with the participation of Sunni countries and to operate against Iran. We are operating against Iranian proxies and not against the problem itself. The central problem is Iran. It is the objective, it is our mission, and I hope that a day after the American elections we'll be able to be in a situation where we establish a coalition, and that coalition will be aimed to help us rehabilitate the Gaza Strip and to bring a different reality there, with a Palestinian Authority there, with an Israeli ability to thwart terror. It has to allow us on the day after to handle all of the Iranian proxies in the Middle East, all those proxies that I mentioned at the beginning of this discussion, and to operate against Iran itself as the one that's generating evil all over the world. Without this, we won't be able to make any progress. It's a government that's preventing us from rehabilitating Israeli society. There is a rare opportunity vis-a-vis Arabs and ultra-Orthodox and Israeli society. I think that we need to take a new look at what civics is, what citizenship is in the State of Israel, and to reach the very simple solution. A citizen in the State of Israel is somebody who serves the State of Israel the way that the State of Israel determines. In other words, either you do military service or you do civilian service, and that includes all citizens of the State of Israel. A citizen who does not serve the State of Israel when he comes of age and is called to the flag will not be able to elect or to get elected. He won't be able to be a public servant or get budgets from the country. But for that, you need to make a change. For that, you need leadership. For that, you need to get rid of this disastrous government. You need to establish a broad government that takes most of Israeli society within it, to mark objectives and targets for the next decade, and to start to rehabilitate what happened to us here for many years into the future. Thank you very much. הפסקה.